So we feel that we're coming out with we don't have rate of onset. It's not much information that they could use in that I met with your group today. I would suggest everything to do discuss it exactly part of the law. But when they come out, you're seeing you're so far away.
I have to guard the phone. The attorney.
It was
City manager and the attorney.
No.
No.
Greg and I both have the same. Your seat is not ready for you. In any way, living situation. We have seen those waters are better than than it is here. Did you see those Yeah. Use connexes are usually about, well, it's not connexes, those are general recycling. Also, you got it. Shannon had like 6 No, we bought it. Oh, they are. They're showers. Oh, okay. Oh, no, I thought you were talking about that. That's a good one.
Can we pass you that?
Yeah, if you would.
They've got that whole lot there. You saw the grab from GCX. Oh, this is the same as Is he at 19 million? I was 92 already.
Victor, I got your helmet in the car.
Oh, and I kind of brain bucket. Yeah, I kind of forgot that one was on. Put on the wind and blowing some hair.
I call to order the Whittier City Council regular meeting Tuesday, August 21st at 7 p.m.
Roll call. Peter Denmark.
Here.
Victor Shen.
Here.
Dave Dixon.
Here.
Monty Irvin is absent. Dave Pinkish,
Here.
Deborah Hicks,
Here.
and Dan Blair.
Here.
Motion to excuse Monty Irvin.
He
Did he write an email or something?
He texted me. He was supposed to make it, but it was last minute. His car, they found problems with it. He went in for a tune-up, and they found additional problems, so he wasn't able to make it.
It's catching. Okay, so I'd ask for a motion to excuse Mr. Irving.
I'll make a motion. Second.
Any discussion? Unanimous consent? Motion passes.
Let the record reflect administration present. Harbor Master Kyle Sinclair, Public Safety Chief of Police Greg Russell, Public Works Scott Corby, and telephonically we have Jim Hunt. Ask for a motion for approval of minutes.
I move to approve the minutes as submitted with a few changes. On July 17th, Holly Wells was listed as at present. She was not present. That should be changed to Ann May Goldsmith. On number 18, on item 18, new business, there's a word, it should be master, M-A-T-E-R, it should be M-A-S-T-E-R, on the comprehensive plan discussion. And on item 20, where it says, and recommended a boat storage, it should be, Dave Pinkish suggested the possibility of a boat storage. It was not Dave Goldstein that recommended the boat storage.
And I've got a couple of comments on the minutes as well.
Yes, sir.
There were a couple statements made in that meeting that are not reflected in the minutes, which I think were relatively important. And the first one, acting city manager stated, point blank, that we are operating outside of our budget. I'd like to see that as a function of the public record. And the other comment that was made for the first time in an open meeting by the acting city manager was that Whittier has no public kayak launch facility. That's never been acknowledged in an open meeting before.
Can you repeat that second one, Peter?
That it was stated by the acting city manager that the city does not have a public kayak launch site.
Does the maker of the motion, is it okay to amend these?
Yes. I'll second.
All right, a motion to approve the minutes with these amendments. Calling for a vote, Dave Pinkish,
Yes.
Dave Dixon,
Yes.
Peter Denmark,
Yes.
Victor Shen,
Yes.
Deborah Hicks,
Yes.
and Dan Blair.
Yes.
Motion passes.
I'd ask for a motion for approval of tonight's agenda.
Move to adopt regular meeting agenda for August 21st, 2018. I'll second. Discussion. I would like to state that it's my opinion that under unfinished business, we should have had Harbor Phase 3 construction, because it is unfinished, even though we made a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Would you like to amend the agenda to add that?
If there's no objection.
All right. So we have a motion to adopt the agenda with the amendments to add Harbor Phase 3 reconstruction to the agenda
Under unfinished business.
under unfinished business. All right, calling for a vote. Dave Pinkish.
Yes.
Dave Dixon.
Yes.
Peter Denmark.
No.
Victor Shen.
Yes.
Deborah Hicks.
Yes.
Dan Blair.
Yes. Madam Clerk, could we just keep the harbor under unfinished business until we get that resolved?
All right. Motion passes 5-1.
Okay, moving on to mayor's report. I don't have anything to add. David, do you have? Moving on to manager's report. Jim?
Jim? Jim?
I am here, thank you.
Do you have anything to add for your manager's report?
Yes, I do. I have a few things I'm going to touch on. First is I have spoken to Grace Pleasant, the representative from the Girdwood Governance Association, regarding the feasibility study and plan for the Prince William Sound Borough. I'd like to ask the council for a consensus for us to fund the consultants and not the association for our part of the feasibility study, and that would be for the amount of $10,000. And I don't know if you want to have any discussion on that right now, or we can come back to it. I go through a few things on my list here. We have opted into the PILT class action suit on our federal lobbyist advice. It's not going to cost us anything, but we don't know what the returns might be, but there's more strength in numbers, as you know. We're also going to touch on the long dock damage in new business. We continue, especially me and my office, continue to go through the digital records on the former finance director's computer. That's going back more than a full year. And we're also going to, in new business, touch on the Cassell contract to reconcile our records. Busy here up in AML, reestablishing relationships. Now for the benefit of Whittier, I ride for the brand. That's going well. Also working on surplusing the basically obsolete ladder truck that's downstairs in our facility. And one other important item, and that's the Alaska Sea Kayakers repair. We're going to ask the council to allow us to bring forth a resolution requesting $48,000 for the repairs on that. And also, just as an additional item, to let you know that my wife and I are now condo owners in BTI. Is that too much, too fast?
Congratulations and condolences.
And we're looking forward to the meeting on Saturday. And I would like to say that, and I'm thinking this will be a little more constructive and to give the council members, mayor, vice mayor, some more information in advance. I've spoken to staff, and we're going to create a city manager report where you will have activities, concerns, upcoming projects in advance of the council meetings. So it'll give you more of an update, more clarity, and then give you an opportunity, to ask us questions in advance, and we can also share that with the community, at our council meetings.
Sounds good, Jim.
Questions?
So what I'm looking for is, maybe a consensus, or just, it would be a professional contract, but I'm just bringing it to you for a consensus for us to continue to explore the Prince William Sound Borough.
Peter, did you have a question?
Not as pertains to Mr. Hunt's question.
Okay, so if I could give a little bit more detail in regards to this borough cost study. There are 3 members of the possible borough that would be funding this study. Cordova is going to be has been asked to provide $25,000, and I think Girdwood is going to be providing $40,000, and I believe it's a function of population. So we have actually the vice president of this Girdwood Governance Association in attendance, Nick Georgilis, and if you had some additional questions regarding this study, it's not an advocation of a borough. It's basically to find out what possible costs are and where possible funding would come from. So
I guess questions, are there any boroughs in, other than North Slope Borough maybe, that is not funded by property taxation?
Sure.
As far as your question goes, I don't have an exact answer for that. I mean, again, this study is something that we are trying to fund to get a lot of those answers.
Okay, and then the next question is schools. Normally, when a borough becomes incorporated, it takes over the schools.
Correct.
So you would have that inherent cost, and the way to control that cost would be to close the school in Whittier and move it and bus kids to Girdwood. Would that not be the most efficient way?
You know, again, these are topics that are going to be discussed once if this idea gets moved forward. But yes, the primary responsibilities of the borough is education and levying taxes. And how the school district is formed is going to be decided further down the road once the community's involved.
Peter?
The last time the Prince William Sound Borough came around the bend was about 15 years ago. And the structuring of the school district was a significant issue then, and a lot of misinformation was passed at that time, which essentially caused the voters in Whittier to not approve the idea. The formation of the borough can take a couple of different forms, and when the communities are as remote and disparate as the communities involved in the Prince William Sound Borough are, there's no reason, my understanding from my conversations with the Boundary Commission at that point, that the individual communities can maintain their school structure and funding as it exists now. The borough does not have to encompass it, was my understanding from a conversation many years ago. That Whittier could keep its school, would not lose its funding as it is currently funded. So I think it's an important issue and will bear some homework, but a lot of misinformation was spread before, and the borough can, the term that was bandied about that boroughs can take different forms, and a borough with disparate communities of disparate geography, borough-like is the idea that should be tried to be forwarded here. That less borough government rather than more. How can we, there's no way that Whittier schools, Valdez and Cordova are going to play basketball together. That has to remain the same. Geography dictates that. And the purpose of the borough, it was also my understanding, I don't have my notes in front of me, but for a borough to be formed, there has to be a mutual, a mutual geography and focus the Prince William Sound Borough was why it made sense was that the borough then would be steeped in the management of the resources of the sound from the communities that surround it, without tying in any significant administrative overlay at the same time. And I know that's a little vague, but when next time I take a look at my notes, there's numerous different options here is my whole point. This is not as structured and strictured as people tend to think.
Some of the ideas that were brought up during the previous meeting as far as funding is, and we have, I think this study will help bring a yes or no to some of this, is that there's a possibility that the state would endow the borough with land, and that would be a possible source of funding, as well as there is a portion of the Alaska Pipeline that is not currently part of a municipality. So that would also be, that was offered up as a possible source of funding. So it wouldn't be, the hope is it wouldn't be entirely funded by property tax.
And I guess I'd just like to clarify that, this request that's coming amongst the council is solely for the funding of an economic study to analyze this topic. All these questions and concerns that people have are hopefully answers that we'll obtain once the study has been done. If you have any questions on the firm that we've decided, I don't know if you've got any information on that. We could give you some information. It's Information Insights is the name of the firm. They're out of Fairbanks. They have a long history in being able in analyzing these topics for other boroughs and cities in the state. So.
It might help to run down the potential benefits that Whittier might receive if a borough was formed. Just kind of a brief rundown.
Yeah, I think that...
Sorry, don't work this thing well. I think, coming out of our meeting that we had with all the communities of Prince William Sound, I think some of the biggest takeaways that all the communities of Prince William Sound found, that one is, the one major one would be a unified voice with the state. That you're not going to the state as a sole city, but you're going to them as a borough. And that holds a lot more clout with the state as far as what I've been told than as being just a city. The other is regional economic development, transportation, things like that can be dealt with more, strongly on a borough level than each city trying to work together to solve those issues. I think those are the two main, things that you'd be looking as improvements.
And in the state ferry system is a prime example of that at the same time. And if the communities of the ferry system around the Sound, it would give them a much stronger voice with the legislature for funding and future development at the same time. And the reason that I supported the borough last time around, this is going to be a little bit of a different story, but in my time in Whittier, one of the few things that the populace is likely to agree on is that Whittier maintain its status as an independent community. And the looming thought has always been incorporation into the Muni over time. Anchorage has been expanding. Girdwood wants out, obviously. And I don't think there's any people up in Eagle River that are real happy about it either.
One thing that you can take away, though, is if this process does move forward, you're completely correct. You basically walk into this with an empty slate, and you are able to draw up the rules and the regs of a borough amongst the communities that are involved. There isn't really you have to do it this way. You can pretty much set those standards. And every community that's in Prince William Sound right now does want to stay as an independent city, as Girdwood does want to become an independent city. So those concerns are held by everyone involved.
The hope would be then the purpose of the borough would be help to maintain a significant degree of independence for each component community.
So that was the benefits. How about downsides?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on this topic, but again, that's why we're hiring a consultant to do a lot of these analysis for us. Downsides, I would say probably is, again, your two major responsibilities of a borough are to levy taxes and school districts. So how those get organized in the borough is I don't know if I'd say it's a downside, but it's going to be a concern of an independent city moving forward. How are my taxes going to be levied, and how is that money going to come back to the city, and what is going to be different between the way it is now and the way it would be as a borough? And the same thing with the school district. Those are large unknowns. This study the main goal is to try to answer those large unknowns that we don't know at this time.
The potential downside is it's an extra layer of government, and if we cannot structure that layer of government so that it's does not interfere with the current way that we do local government, then you're basically paying for more bureaucracy.
I agree totally. That's what it is. More bureaucracy, more government, big government. Jim, what do you need from us on this? Did you say a consensus?
Yeah, just a consensus for us just to go ahead with basically what, compared to the other parties, of minimal investment. So at least just for the feasibility study with the consultants, so they can take a look and spell out, the pros and cons, and, you, the council, and the people can make a decision from there, to our level of commitment.
Okay, well, just for one, I would say no.
I think, is it possible for us to give you consensus, yes or no, and have one proviso, and that is, I would like to give consensus providing that Cordova also contributes to the study.
Sure, yeah, to make it, contingent on their participation. Sure.
And so, council, what I see is an opportunity for pennies on the dollar to get a lot of information put before us in a factual way, and better prepare us whether that whether it's no or yes. So can we just kind of go down the row here and give yay or nay?
If the investment is minimal, I see no reason not to take a peek.
I don't feel like any more information to make a decision here. But is that also something I didn't expect on the agenda? Bring all this stuff and it's explained to us verbally, and we have nothing on paper we can look at. That's very frustrating because I feel like I can make an educated decision on this.
I feel like as long as the other communities contribute, I think, the knowledge, of this feasibility study would be valuable. So I would say yes.
I'm okay with it, but I would love a lot of more information as things go, so we all are very informed as to what it is, and yeah.
Peter?
I'd just like to offer, I do not disagree with Victor. We have been precluded in these meetings from discussing numerous topics because it was not on the agenda.
Because the cost point is less than, it's within the dollar amount of the council, of the city manager, as far as something that he can spend. I think it's like,
I thought that number was 5,000.
It was, we raised it.
When?
I think it was back in Boland's time. Basically, all of our credit cards were each department head was limited to 5,000, and they were going over. I don't know what that dollar amount is, but
the $9,000 expenditure is in the city manager's purview.
Jim?
I don't know. Where I was before, it was 50,000, but being this was, would be a politically sensitive subject, it didn't even occur to me. That's why I just brought it right to you, the council.
Okay, there is a dollar amount that's within your ability to spend. I just don't know what that dollar amount is. So I believe it's $9,000, but it'd be nice to know that. The way this would play out is if we approve and or give consensus, I believe that the study actually comes back pretty quickly for this comprehensive of a study, and the first meeting and dissemination of the information, I think, is in October. Is that correct?
It all depends on when we start the study. Right now, we're looking to have kickoff meetings with the consultant around the 2nd to 3rd week of September. And then they have a 60-day turnaround period on the report. So again, if there's delays with obtaining funding and things like that, dates could get pushed down the road.
So I would, Jim, I'd like to give my consensus or my support, providing that you do not exceed your dollar amount that's specified in code.
Sure. Deborah? I will follow the code in your direction. All of your directions.
So tonight you have 4 yeses and 2 nos.
Okay. And, the association has been notified, as to, the commitment level is going to be without, a resolution and, further follow-up that it'll be to my limit. And if it's 9,000, it's 9,000.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
Jim, was there another point that I guess we've got the other one? The other item you brought up is on. We have a resolution for.
Yeah, there was also the Alaska Sea Kayak repair. That's to require, a council appropriation of $48,000 to proceed with that.
That was, I think there's a resolution on that in there, and that's the dock, the long dock.
I'm looking here. Okay. Yep, there we go. Okay. That's all I have, council. Unless there's any other questions.
I believe we got some questions for Kyle. Is that right, Dave?
Not if we're going to handle under unfinished business, unless Kyle has something.
Okay, so moving on to public safety report. Greg?
Is your public safety report in the packet? Public Works, and I don't see a city manager report here.
Public Works?
I got
2 resolutions and the minutes.
There's a bunch of minutes.
That's all I got.
What's in the packet?
Mr. Mayor, the public safety report is an oral report. There's nothing that needed to be brought to the council as far as information, but was prepared to answer some specific questions I told that you may have regarding some interest points, specifically the Girdwood contract. I understand there were some questions that we wanted to have fielded by me. Also understand that some of them may be better answered in an executive session, and so that's why they were not put in written format at this point. Just a couple of additional information before we go on that, just to give you kind of a heads up. We are moving along on the Cordova contract that we was approved last year, or last session. Wanted to thank you for that, and I expect to have that be rolled out and operational quite soon. Also, we're making progress on our personnel recruitment and retention. I have another officer that's going to be coming on board on the 14th. He has been through the academy and trained, will hit the ground running, has not been certified yet, but that'll be coming soon. Also made advancements on getting a volunteer fire chief, and that will be part of your packet next week as far as that information is concerned. Also wanted to just give you a heads up as well for a commendation for the police department that you do currently have, and I'm sure you all read about the meth bus that came in. That was some good solid police work. It seriously put Whittier on the map in a very positive way. We received quite a bit of statewide, local, and also some national attention, and we're leveraging that to our advantage. Again, that's just good solid police work. And in very broad strokes, I would like to advocate for continuation of or a renewed negotiation for the Girdwood contract, and either can give you some broad stroke bullet points on that now, or wait until the council would like to ask that, maybe perhaps in executive session or off record, whatever your council's preference now.
I just think there's a lot of stuff here that could be detrimental to the finances, so we probably should schedule it for executive session for the next meeting if we're not in a rush to do so.
That was the impression that I got coming into this, and I'd be happy to stay around for an executive session on this time or the next session, whatever would be the pleasure of the council. I can tell you at this point that my position is to advocate for continued negotiation of the contract for a lot of good reasons that I think that would be beneficial to the city of Whittier and its ability to provide contracted police services to the city of Girdwood. But since we are in a negotiation process, I think it would be best in an executive session.
Well, I tell you that the comments I have, if council will just stop me when you think it's getting into the weeds there, as far as detrimental to our I'm not going to talk about money. In my observation of the Girdwood contract is that it's a great idea. However, the implementation has been less than perfect. The resources required to fulfill this contract have caused the city of Whittier's administration to lose focus on local priorities. The scarcity of qualified law enforcement personnel has magnified the problem of providing personnel for the contract. Instead of trying to keep a qualified staff of 3, we are now trying to keep a qualified staff of 9. This has proven, I don't know if proven is the right word, but it appears to be more than 3 times as challenging as keeping 3. One of my questions is, and before we start talking about renewal of this contract, is, last year we put off a first ever music festival that everyone was excited about because we're dealing with this contract for Girdwood. And, I love Girdwood. I love that we, as a community, were able to provide some professional services that I think has improved the quality of their lives. But as a community member of Whittier, I have to, in my judgment, this contract has taken on a life of its own. And I see where we're turning down opportunities and or not able to take full advantage of opportunities that are available to this. I mean, we are a very blessed community with lots of opportunity, and we're not going to be able to leverage and take advantage of that opportunity if we're not very careful with how this Girdwood contract plays out. We're not here to serve Girdwood exclusively. I'm pretty frustrated with the current way that this contract is playing out. One of my, I don't see how this would be. I have a lot of concerns about PERS liability. I think that Greg's reaching out to Cordova is excellent because it's contract and it does not imply PERS. And I'd like to see, if we continue forward on this contract, I'd like to see more solutions like that, so that that contract stands on its own, and we as a community can address those priorities that are local to us, that are important to us. I would like to see a very well supported by our police opportunity for a music festival in 2019. And anyway, it just seems like we're missing the Whittier contract in this contract, and I'd like to have it so that we are guaranteed public safety first. And I understand the obligations of a contract to Girdwood, but I feel that contract has taken on a life of its own that's not always in the best interest of Whittier. And anyway, Greg, do you know how many police vehicles you're planning on purchasing to get our fleet up to functional level?
Yes, I do. And if I may, I'd like to address some of your concerns. The notion that Whittier is somehow playing second fiddle to Girdwood is not correct. We start from here. Our officers work here. They wear the Whittier patch. Their priority is, of course, providing public safety concerns and services to our community. The Girdwood is second. And we do not miss calls for service. There may be a few minutes before we get here, and I say a few. We're not able to run across the street, as I did just this weekend, to a call on foot. That's nice if we could do that on a 24/7 basis, but we don't. The reality is that if we did not have the Girdwood contract and the officer was transporting a person to jail, and from here, without the contract, it would still be a 3-hour response time from his time of leaving here, tunneling out, getting to the jail, and getting back. Without the contract, there would be at least a 3-hour delay. That is the nature of the beast, because we are remote and we take care of that in there. We have to transport to Anchorage. We do not neglect our responsibility here. And the officers all, like I said, wear the Whittier patch. We provide a community policing model that I hope will become the example of the way things should be done, that when they take a look at how does community policing work, they'll be able to take a look at us and say, this is the way that it does work. That we are responsive to our community, but we have expanded our opportunity to provide these officers with training and experience. if you were to have just 3 officers and you were to limit them to only within inside the Whittier confines, they would become bored, they would become hyperactive, and they would be up in everybody's business every time you turned around because there was nothing else for them to do. Now there is something else for them to do, and they're dealing with a different clientele than what the Whittier is limited in providing them. They are able to go over there, they're interacting with a lot of the strata that comes out of Anchorage on a regular basis, so they're making more traffic stops, they're investigating more crimes, they are dealing with more people, they are recovering more property. All of that makes them a better officer, and we benefit from that here in this community without having that training and that experience come at our hands alone. Furthermore, if they didn't have this contract, then all of the expenses that are associated with public safety, from wages to equipment to training to everything else like that, would be solely borne by the community. The contract that we currently are operating under, I think, can be improved upon. I think that we can negotiate a better rate. I think that we can be more detailed in what is expected in managing their expectations and our expectations. I agree with you. I think we can do a better job on the contract. As far as management is concerned, I think there's a lot of other issues that come into play than just saying it could be managed better. They gave us money, and we're not able to give them a full accounting of how that money is being spent and where it's and how it's been spent in the past. We can do better on that. And in answer to your question about how many vehicles that I anticipate on buying, right now we're operating with vehicles that are very tired, worn out, and they were surplused when we got them. And by adding the extra miles of going here to Girdwood on a regular basis, by going into Anchorage because we're taking people to jail, then we're just compounding the problem. I would like to begin downsizing our fleet now with these tired, heavily maintained vehicles into something that comes with a warranty. And there's a couple of options that we could explore. Rather than just going out and have the cash outlay for buying brand new vehicles, there's actually a lease program or a financing program that's open to public safety, to where you would be able to buy vehicles, finance them, and pay them off over time at a reduced cash outlay to your community. I think that we could very comfortably get rid of several of our current fleet and replace them for our benefit here in Whittier. At least 2, possibly 3. And they would be coming with a warranty, and they would be low mileage, and they would be equipped, and they would be quite serviceable. We can do that quite comfortably. I agree with what you're saying, that I believe the contract can be managed better, and negotiated better, and that would be something that somebody in my position would be able to influence and bring about. But the bottom line is that I would really want to remind the council that every one of those officers that you're talking about wear a Whittier Police patch, that when they are over there and I call and ask what they're doing, if they're not actively engaged with something, hightail yourself back over here. They're not just hiding out over there. They're not just goofing off, but they're actively working. And it's a service that we don't have to be over there any specified number of days or hours of a day. It's just in response to calls that we have to do that. So I agree with what you're saying, but I also would like to underscore that the community does benefit. I further would like to say that I believe you have a better likelihood of retaining officers when they are able to expand their experience rather than just limit it to right in here. This is a tremendous opportunity to retrain officers, giving them something more to do. This is not going to sound right, and I apologize ahead of time when I say there really isn't a whole lot of stuff to do inside of Whittier as far as investigating serious crimes or doing other things like that. We can do some things better. We can become more involved with the community, but we also need to gain the experience that having a second community that we serve through contract will be able to provide them. I honestly and sincerely believe we'll have a better chance of retaining them than just by limiting their experience potential right here.
That's what you're talking about, Greg, is it sounds great on paper, and that was certainly my expectations, is that we would have, instead of a higher turnover, we would essentially have, I thought it was going to be more like 5 officers, but 5 or 9. We would have faces that we would recognize, and they would stay with us year-round, which was one of the reasons why I thought it would, and the exposure to additional training. In practice, at least to this point, we now have, we have 1 police officer that has been here for more than a year. All the others are gone. I think we now have...
Mr. Mayor, I would be quick to point out it wasn't the fault of the contract for that.
I understand. It's the scarcity of qualified, trained policemen. I mean, the rest of the state is basically seeing us as an excellent training ground, and they basically they gave bonuses that were, money was probably provided to them federally. I don't know, but they
Fairbanks offered a $20,000 signing bonus because they recognize that when you do the math, when it costs $50,000 to $60,000 to take a recruit and make him into a certified officer, they were money ahead by hiring a certified officer and give him a $20,000 training bonus. Now, I'd like to say that that was a successful program and they achieved everything that they hoped to, but they're still recruiting. The state troopers, Friday there was a meeting in Anchorage, and they were on the podium. It was Senator Sullivan's Reducing Crime in Alaska program. They were talking about how difficult it is to recruit because the troopers are being wooed away by other more high-paying agencies. Anchorage, they're, for the first time in many years, have got a fully staffed academy. Fairbanks, the same way. I've been calling around to see if there would be people to recruit from them, and only Fairbanks has a self-pay now. Everybody else is full. And our loss, we lost 1 to Kodiak, we lost 1 to Wasilla, we lost 1 to the airport police. Now, they could have hired anybody else, but they had the opportunity and they took ours. And that's the reality of law enforcement across the state.
Right. And in this case, I'm wrongly blaming the contract, but it's the I mean, I don't see that going away. I think that this is going to continue because we're either going to have to increase the pay of our, something's got to change, because otherwise, what I don't want to see is essentially we get excited about doing a music festival again, and then all of a sudden we're down to a minimum number of officers, and I think rightly so, you say, no, we can't do it.
We're making progress, Mr. Mayor, and there's a lot of things that had been detrimental to our ability to recruit. Those have been resolved. We're still getting good quality people. The one that is coming in September the 14th had actually decided to revisit the agency, and we're glad that he's going to be coming back to join us.
I would make 2 comments on that. One is simply that it's not just police. Whittier isn't for everybody, but it takes time to go through these to get ones that want to stick, number 1. And number 2, didn't I hear too that we have an opportunity for reduced price academy from APD?
Yes, that's correct. Chief Dahl with APD has offered to, as long as our applicants meet the hiring standards and the performance standards, and there's a slot available, allow us to put our officer in the APD Academy. Otherwise, if we send him to Fairbanks or to Sitka, that's a $10,000 bill borne by the agency. We'll just have to bear the expenses of sending him there. Essentially getting him for free, just our costs.
Peter.
Before we took the Girdwood contract, our staffing levels was 4 full-time and 1 seasonal officer. Whittier's population has remained relatively static for the last 30 years. We used to have 1 officer in town. In the early 2000s, a strong statement was made by the local populace that they wanted 24/7 police coverage. And that's when we leapt from a single Andy Griffith to 4 full-time and 1 seasonal officer. And I'm hearing from some of the locals that on 2 separate occasions, the call was made to the Whittier Police and the response time was over 2.5 hours because nobody was here. And what's important to me, and I believe is important to most of the locals, is we do have a constant local presence here with a public safety, with police officers. That's it.
Thank you. If you had 1 officer on and he was transporting, like I said, into Anchorage, that would be a while before he could get here.
Well, with two full-time and 1 part-time seasonal, 1 would be transporting, 1 would still be here.
Thank you.
Greg, thanks for the information. Like I said, I did misstate that we're getting a lot of turnover, and that's not the fault of the contract. It's the climate of the state of Alaska. I mean, there's a lot of communities that are trying to beef up their police forces at the same time.
Thank you.
Parks and Rec?
Scott.
Is there any questions for Scott? Oh, go ahead.
He's got some.
Sorry, I didn't see you there, Scott.
No problem there.
Council, I'd like to apologize. I didn't get a report in the packet. Last week was a little hectic. I have a couple things to note. Public Works in the City of Whittier made some huge gains last week. We now have a 50-pair phone line into this building. We have 12 strands of fiber optic, and our water control system and telemetry are now in this building. This all took place with partnering with GCI, which is the parent company of UUI. They've installed all this at free of charge to the city of Whittier. We could have had free fiber optic cables into this building and been operating under UUI and GCI if previous administrations would have taken the time to contact them and work with them. It is available here in the city of Whittier. And getting to know GCI and work with GCI this week, we have gone to the backside of the triangle behind Log Cabin Gifts, Cafe Orca, and Ed Feast. There's erosion control going on there. Public Works has been hamstrung in proceeding with work back there from previous administrations. I'm throwing previous administrations under the bus. I've promised the business owners that when they left, we could start dealing with that and making headway to repair that facilities or that infrastructure. GCI had noted, I showed it to them, and they noted that it is partly their responsibility and their fault when UConn installed it. They did not do it correctly. The repairs that have been done in the past are substandard and not adequate for that type of conditions that are out there. In the spirit of partnering with GCI, GCI is purchasing 150 cubic yards of 3-inch minus rock from Prue's Construction. They will be installing that September, October this year. Whittier will be providing, we will rent an excavator from a local source here. We'll go to the head of the bay and pull riprap out of the existing stockpile that is up there. We will haul it to the triangle area, and GCI will place it and armor that bank in there, as we've done in the past, to having some success in doing so. This is a semi-permanent, hopefully a 10 to 15 year fix in there. Also, it was noted behind Alaska Sea Kayakers, we have erosion going on there. There's a cable that is exposed that is an aerial cable. They will be repairing the aerial cable that has been buried in the ground and putting that into direct burial cable and improving that infrastructure. The Alaska Sea Kayakers, as requested by our city manager, we have an opportunity here, a very good opportunity with crews being in here to do some work at a discounted rate. So I spent time with Prue's Construction and the proprietor of Alaska Sea Kayakers out there on the grade discussing solutions that are economical and in a semi-permanent fix until further development can be done for the travel lift and an enhanced harbor front down there as discussed by the harbor master or through the Ports and Harbor Commission. This is an interim fix. It's, like I said, a semi-permanent. We will go in there, bury back the cable, put it's called a cushioning blanket, which is a section of rock that allows water to migrate through it, and then install riprap over the top of it. It will restore some of the land base back there and be way better. It's, I think, $48,000 is the purchase price of that. Because we have an existing contract with Prue's Construction in our code, it is well within our permissible right to contract with them directly or issue them a change order for this work. This saves us RFP costs, engineering costs. The only thing that is lacking, if you approve the purchase, the issuance of the change order, I still have to get Corps permission. I was in contact with the Corps today. Bruce Sexauer, the regional head, he has paved the way for me to talk to their permitting and emergency permitting body. I've contacted them. I do not have a phone call back. So I expect to have approval in the next 30 days in preparation for Prue's to do the work if so approved. It's been busy. We've made some big gains in the city of Whittier, and we've built some good relationships this last week. Any questions?
Thanks, Scott. Do we have a report from Parks and Rec?
Just verbally, Victor and I have been working on grants over the past week or so, and that's about all we've had a chance to do.
Very good. Citizens' comments on agenda items not scheduled for public hearing.
Ports and Harbor.
Greg, did you have anything that you wanted to add to Ports and Harbor?
Pretty much just in your packet you have from our normal meeting. We approved the minutes from that, and then we did have a special meeting here in July discussing the final phase, the funding for the final phase of the harbor rebuild. You can kind of see where we went there with that. I think you guys are going to discuss it in old business, so I can chime in there if needed, or if you guys have questions for where Parks and Harbor was with that. I don't remember, there's no page numbers on this one, so I can't tell you what page it is. Towards the back there, last 3 pages. There was a resolution that came up in that meeting to move forward with the funding for that, and that motion failed unanimously from the 7 of us that were there. So.
Thank you, Greg. I'd ask for a motion for the resolution.
Which resolution?
adopt Resolution 21, 2008. Or do you want it? Is that one you're talking about?
I'll second.
This is just a standard annual.
Discussion?
This is a standard annual contract. The same company we've been using. Okay.
Jim?
Yes, this is, thank you. Yeah, this is the same company that we used last year. I believe it's for the same amount, and it's just, we're just asking for approval to go ahead and approve this resolution for the appraisal services.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none?
There's a typo on it. I just realized. I think for the adoption date or the introduction date, it's October 2016, as I went off the template. So I'm going to change that. Just pointing that out. And I will call for a vote. Dave Pinkish.
Yes.
Dave Dickinson.
Yes.
Victor Shen.
Yes.
Deborah Hicks. Yes. Peter Denmark.
Yes.
And Dan Blair.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Moving on to unfinished business, harbor upgrade. Discussion?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Mayor, the last meeting we voted to postpone indefinitely. There were two things stated. One was that there needs to be a more in-depth conversation. Number two, Mr. Denmark asked for a finance plan. The finance plan was just passed out before the meeting started. Very basic plan is simply that well, basically the city, the harbor, and which came from the mayor, the harbor and the CVP funds do a match of $310,000 each, and I've had discussion with several council members that about the interdepartmental support, which will come up in budgeting, and I would submit that if we were to if we do cut back on the interdepartmental support that is paid to the harbor, it could actually be a 60-40 split without issue. This also went before Ports and Harbors was voted down, but Ports and Harbors were given no plan. They weren't given any information of how it was specific. I'm told they weren't told how it was going to be financed, so they didn't have the information so to know how it would be financed. And we're coming up on a wall with the bonds. October is the end of when these bonds can be purchased, and we'll lose that interest rate. And the bond fund has, and Kyle has a lot of this, the bond fund has suggested that we roll the one we have together with the one we have now. And what that does, it makes it cleaner, but it also prevents a spike at the end of the first bond, which the last 2 or 3 years would go higher. But anyway, those are numbers for it, and a statement that I wish Annie was here because I wish I could clarify. You know, sometimes what the minutes are is not word for word, but it says Annie Rees told the commission the city cannot forecast their finances. Is that not what is done every year with a budget? And what we have is we have basically the checkbook is not balanced. It doesn't mean we aren't financially solvent. I talked to Diana. I asked her if there's any signs that revenue.
Annie, she's watching and she said she could call in if that's okay, if you had any questions.
If she wants to clarify that, I mean, I'm just going to speak to it. But Diana said there is no reason to indicate that revenue is down on taxes of any form. The harbor has their own financing. They said their revenue is equal or higher. I've talked to 5 businesses. Every business said their revenue is equal or higher. We have 4 additional resources of revenue this year. We are leasing the P12 building. That's additional funding. We're going to sell the P12 building. We're going to sell the condos. I don't know when it comes in line, but we will start getting in it with your taxes, because once they have satisfied that judgment, that's going to be $50,000 plus annually. And there's one more that's come. Oh, the Long Dock, we have revenue coming from that. So every indication is we have additional money. But my concern is that it looks like, and I wasn't there, and you can only tell so much for the minutes, but it appears that the information given suggested that the city checkbook is where the harbor is going to be financed. It's not. And the harbor master has made a statement that if necessary, they can find it without that they can carry that $471,000 if they have to without additional resources. We just need that money for the down payment. So if we're not going to do this, let's vote it down so that BMI can move on and the bond fund can move on. If we're going to do it, let's do it. This is my feeling, is rather than just letting it sit. If we let it sit, it's the same as killing it. So if the opportunity is here, an additional thing that could happen is, if there's some damage done on the Long Dock, there is a engineer's report which addresses part of it, but something that could be done if the money is there is, in reality, is, we don't know the lifespan of that dock, but my thought is when we got the pile driver here, you could add a few extra pilings to that Long Dock and probably extend the life of that thing 10 or 15 years, give us some room for not a lot of money. BMI has actually been talked about that, and they said they could replace all the pilings for about $500,000 if they could do it when they are here, but that's kind of a separate issue. And then to address the question, and this is a reiteration, but to address, there was a statement made, why should the city fund the harbor anymore? And so I want to go over the history of interdepartmental support. In the beginning, the harbor paid nothing to the city. Then the city decided to take 8% of the gross. Then later they decided to increase that to 10% of the gross. Then they decided, in addition, they would take 10% of the gross plus $35,000 extra for public works. Then in addition to that, they added 20% of the city manager's wages. Then in addition to that, they added 50% of Joe Fish's wages. Then they took the area that is now where the Inn at Whittier sits in the cruise ship dock is, that used to be land that was for the harbor, and they had boat storage there, and they had all that. So all that has been taken away. In addition, when the city took the management of the harbor over, the state gave $2.55 million to the city for repairs. Not one dime of that was used for repair. So and then on top of that, there is question about, there was some money that came up missing. We'll never find it. We'll never know. But so there was a lot given. And then you go on. In addition, the boat owners pay taxes, and you would think some of that revenue should come back. But I would submit that there's plenty of money been taken back, and it's the biggest economic engine we have in the city. More than 50% of taxes come from boats. And on top of that, the harbor now is managing the Long Dock at this point at no expense, which we need to address in interdepartmental support. But so there is sufficient, but clearly there is sufficient funds. The harbor netted $400,000. You can ask the harbor master. He has reduced the labor costs from what we had last year, which should increase it. And if we do deal with the interdepartmental support, we'll have sufficient funds to do it. So anyway, I think it would be, I think because our checkbook is out of balance is not the reason to postpone this when the opportunity is all here to get it done. And I don't know BMI's deadline, but they right now my understanding is they could still switch it from doing it in the fall to switch it in the spring. Yeah, so they're still on board with being able to get it done within a year's time.
So Dave, I got a question with regard to pile driving in the spring. Are there restrictions?
Yes, there are. Scott, do you remember the months? Is it October to March?
I want to say the last day that pile program can occur as March 31st to March 30th.
I believe it was October 1st to March 31st or something to that effect. It's in that window. It starts in October, ends in March.
I got a question. In your research, did you find out how much CVP funding was directed to the harbor rebuild in the last 5 years? I looked in.
I don't know the amount. $3 million? Was it that high?
It's close somewhere around there.
I think it was.
The first phase was 800,000, the sheet pile, and then I want to say it was $1 million contributed to the second phase, which would be the, no, it was a D, F, and G, and I can't remember what was contributed last phase.
But the sheet pile was about erosion control for the harbor uplands. It wasn't for the harbor itself.
The statement made by the city manager at the last meeting was that we are not in control of our budget. And that's a little above and beyond not having the checkbook balance. We are not, I am not assured of the integrity of our fund balances, our investment accounts, and any accruals. I think this is a little beyond being able to balance the checkbook. And I understand where this financial plan is coming from, but there's a lot of subjective verbiage in this plan. And usually a financial plan should be an exact science, I mean to the dollar. Words used just under approximately is on track to exceed approximately, likelihood approximately is not a heck of a lot better than that scratch paper on a cocktail napkin we got from Mr. Janik at the last meeting.
Well,
this also doesn't say anything about what the total cost of the bond ends up being.
Depends on when it's paid off. You know, that I can submit, I try to make it as simple as possible instead of giving you thousands of numbers, which is what the bond fund if you want all that laid out, which when you look at it, you won't understand it, I can do that. But the reason it says approximately is because payments vary year to year. There is no $471,252. One year it's 473, next year it's 468. It's because of the number of days in the year. So that's why that one was done. And the $255,000 is because I didn't look it up again. The bond payments change every year. That's another reason why it's. And if you look, and also if you read the bonds carefully, that looks like the interest rate goes up as the bond progresses, which I can't quite decipher. But the bond that they gave us looks to me like it's front loaded with low interest, and as it gets later, it gets larger, so that the interest is higher later on. The interest doesn't drop as much later on for the bond. I'm not positive that's true, but I couldn't understand that actually.
So I appreciate the work being done, but why isn't Kyle up here talking to us? It's his harbor.
Because he just had surgery yesterday.
Gotcha.
I mean, if it goes the whole 40 years, then it's, it's a $20 million cost.
It's 20 years.
20 years, not 40 years, okay.
And it's a separate issue. To me, we've talked about making it independent. If we were able to pay this off in 14 years by doing this, then the amount that's being paid by the harbor would continue into an account into CDs again. And if for example, if you go $310,000 in 30 years, which is about when it'll be needed rebuilt, you'll have $15 million in the bank. If you go to a 60/40, you'll have about $18 or $19 million, which is almost enough to rebuild. It depends on inflation. But all that information is there. I try to cut it down because there are pages and pages of how it's paid off every year, and when you see it, it really doesn't make sense.
Two things. I was under the impression that bond payments had a strict repayment schedule that we couldn't pay off extra. I don't know if that needs to be confirmed or denied. And then the second one was there was a grant available earlier this year that that was not submitted. I was wondering if that grant, was it the Tiger grant? Do we know if that's going to be available next year?
Not for sure, is my understanding. And the answer to the first question is the bonds are set up where if you pay off the bonds in 2 years, you still pay the interest for 10 years. After that, you can pay them off. So that's what this suggests is rather than paying $150,000 the first 10 years, you would actually put that in a CD. And at the end of 10 years, it would be enough to pay off the one bond because it would be foolish to pay extra toward the loan because you're still going to pay the interest for the first 10 years. So you can actually almost match the interest because CDs are exceeding 3% right now for long-term CDs.
And how much was the Tiger grant that we missed? What was the amount of that?
The total was like $27 million. And one of the things it would have done was paid off these bonds, but that was.
If we were serious about this, we wouldn't have missed that, okay? I mean, that was a critical step in getting this done. And before we start talking about creating indebtedness in the millions again here, I'm not comfortable approving anything until a qualified fiduciary comes to this council and says you are in control of your budget. I have no business spending millions of dollars until we know where we're at today.
I was also going to ask Jim, with his experience in Seward, what he thinks the chances are of getting grants for additional funding.
Thank you. I think our opportunities are better than you would expect right now. Continuing, considering the possibility of the capital improvement budget down in Juneau, and working, as you may be aware, I've worked closely with both of our lobbyist firms for years. Not to put too sharp a point on it, as the communities within the region are a little bit of disarray, which leads us, to a more of a slight advantage. And I do concur. We're not in complete financial disarray, but as we're going to talk about here shortly, about Cassell, we're getting our arms around it and going to be bringing in, an expert in municipal finances to, get the ship straight, and so we know exactly where we are. And I feel confident, we should have that done here in the next month or two. I know there are deadlines that we're looking at, but that's where we are right now.
So there is the possibility, I'm not holding you to this, Jim, but it's the expert that you're talking about would be able to at least give us a timeline in 30 days' time, as far as, if it's going to be.
So. I'm hoping without jumping ahead on the agenda, with Cassell, we were looking at 2018, for a lot of 2018, then I came on and I was talking to Andy and I looked and, I said, we can't do anything until we know about the last half of 2017. That's how far back this comes. So, we know where we are, we see light at the end of the tunnel, and we're moving forward just as quickly and efficiently as we can.
Naylene, what were you had your hand up?
Oh, Annie's kind of badgering me. She's like, I could call in. So if you guys want her to join the meeting, that's up to you. She could answer questions. Okay.
She's supposed to be on vacation.
I told her to stop.
Stay on vacation.
She's on vacation.
So, harbor upgrade is going to be on unfinished business for the regular meeting of September, and we might have better clarification at that point. Moving on to new business, the Long Dock emergency repair.
Question?
Yes.
The damage was caused by a collision with a motor vessel, correct?
Jim, do you...
Storm.
Kyle?
It was while it was tied up during the storm.
Okay, well, was it tied, what I'm going to is responsibility here. Was it tied properly? Are we on the hook for this? Isn't the boat owner complicit in some way? If I hit the gas pedal instead of the brake and drive in through the front of the harbor office, I think I'm on the hook.
That would be hard to do.
What I've gathered so far is that this occurred during a windstorm, and the boat was tied up moored to the dock, and the waves, the wind, and everything else in conjunction ripped our pilings off. Right now we have it submitted into the insurance company, and so there's an investigator looking at it. So whose fault? I don't have an answer for you because the investigators are looking at it. So, but I'm just saying, in order for us to get back on track, we need to do some work on that dock to get it back up to shape.
Thank you.
One question. Do you know how much revenue we have acquired from the DeLong dock to date?
So we should have, when I say should, the last count I had on was about $250,000.
And we did not get all the revenue for 2018, correct?
That is correct. We only got from July 10th on the north side of the dock, and the south side we got whatever Whittier Seafood gave us, and that was about $150,000 in fish count so far.
Kyle, as the harbor master, did you have a policy in place regarding the DeLong dock, because it's not a floating dock? Did you require the operators of those vessels to have somebody on board?
Yes, we do have. There's supposed to be somebody on board all the time, and there was somebody on board. But what happened was he couldn't get away from it because one of the pilings came down on his screw and jammed it in, and so he's hanging there. So, then we had to go down and take a chainsaw and cut it away from him.
So he was asleep.
Probably. I have no idea. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't tell you.
What from the photos, it looked like to me that boat, once the storm started going, it's a big vessel. So you getting out there and wrestling that thing probably get somebody hurt. But essentially, the lines went slack, so you had multiple tons of a vessel pulling on pilings, is what it looked like to me.
That's what it looked like to me, but I'm not an investigator, and so I'm leaving that up to them. That's why I've been kind of quiet about it, because still insurance companies are dealing on it. So, and we don't know yet on how much money that the insurance company is willing to even give us for our side of the repairs.
What other expenses has the DeLong dock come up with since we've taken over?
None, except for just routine, maintenance. Just daily stuff that but nothing serious. We've not shelled out $1 yet, just for time and some materials.
I guess aside from this damaged piling, what are some anticipated maintenance needs for that dock in the next year?
Not only one side, but both sides. The north side is in severe, that's why I asked for P&D to look at it. And the pictures don't really help you much, but on the north side, the railing and the boulder lines and stuff all needs to be repaired on that side as well. We have metals I-beams sticking out. They couldn't jam it into a boat. Scott was able to give me a couple of old loader tires that we dropped over the side to protect the boats until we can get repair done on it. So we're living right now is kind of a, we were hoping we could get some of this stuff done without damage, and that's what happened. Was we got damage on the south side, and I can't place the blame on it, but if I'd have been the captain, I think I would have pulled that boat out somewhere else, but that's just my decision, not his, so I don't know.
What are the, our electric bills and stuff looking like out there?
I haven't paid attention to them. They're, it's just, I got to look at it and see. I haven't paid much attention, but we, probably have, just to guesstimate, water's probably more expensive. That's probably around $25,000 at this point.
But they're on the contract that you signed, they're paying for the water and they're paying for the electricity independent of the revenue source, right?
That is correct. So if you excuse me, I got to sit down, so thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you. Does this require any action?
I don't think we're there yet.
Looks like we have two Jim, what do we have before us here?
Under the new business?
Yes, sir, for DeLong Dock emergency repair.
Well, that's kind of what we were just talking about. And looking to see what we can do, and maybe we can, if all the planets align, we could, use the same contractor and save the additional MOBA costs from anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 to work on the piling repairs. We're basically not just waiting for the reports to see if we can, make this work and save the city some money.
So the idea would be if we were able to reconcile our books and award that the harbor upgrade, that we would be able to save $70,000 on mobilization costs of a pile driver.
Correct. That's that's a ballpark, but it's a real close ballpark for that number, which is considerable.
So are you asking us for approval of a condition assessment tonight?
Yes, and it's going to be kind of contingent on what comes back as to what the costs are, obviously, and the responsibilities. But at this point, our fingers are crossed that everything's going to work out, to our favor.
So it looks like we've got $4,000 for to assess the damage of the fender, broken fenders that may or may not be covered under insurance, and general dock condition assessment is $14,000.
Correct.
Is there a perceived need for a general dock condition assessment at this time?
Jim, you're recommending that we get a condition assessment on the DeLong Dock at this time?
Yes, I'm sorry. Sometimes when the counselor's voices are a little far away from the mic, I can't hear clearly. That's exactly correct. And that'll give us a foundation to work with as well for now and in the future.
I would just point out P&D is the engineering firm that we quit using with the harbor and some of that was based on different reasons, but the reason you have to walk through the water to get to the harbor, although the last time we met with them, I will say this, they had new engineers, they had younger guys that seemed to be a lot more in tune with reality, I guess. I don't know. That's not the right word, but they had, for those who don't know, I asked a lot of questions of the old P&D engineers. They couldn't answer any of them, and then they brought these new guys in and they had all the answers. They understood what was going on, so it was a completely different group of people, and they were much better at what they do. But that's what
I understand as well.
Peter. So we did do a structural integrity assessment before we decided to take over the DeLong dock, and this is only about a year ago. Right?
Correct.
I believe it was in June of 17.
Okay, a little over a year ago. So after our first partial year of owning the DeLong dock, now we need to do a condition assessment now. So, and Jim, I'm sorry, the question was rhetorical. I think this probably should have been done before we decided to take the dock over, is where I'm going with this.
Yes.
And so that's spilled milk. Given the investment in the future of this dock that we have, given that we're considering spending significant dollars in the harbor, depending on revenues from the DeLong dock to support it, we should probably do this.
And I concur, and if I could also add, I actually have that on my desk. I don't have that with me, that assessment and study, but I don't recall, I don't know who else is in the audience, but I don't recall it specifically addressing that side and those wood pilings.
It did not.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't even know there were wood pilings on the dock. I thought they were all steel. I guess there's not any wood standing. Any further questions? Hearing none. We're asking, Jim is asking for funding on $18,000 for assessment costs.
And so point of order here. Do we do this by consensus, straw poll, resolution, motion? We have been stumbling over this stuff for a long time. How does this need to be presented to the table to be forwarded to the city manager?
I would, if I could just, I would like to bring this forward in a resolution.
For next month?
Yes.
Perfect.
I second that.
Moving on to second item B, extended agreement with Cassell.
Ms. Mayor, and I don't know if Annie, who has been having considerable conversations with them more than I have, if she's available to comment.
Should we? Or should she stay?
Yeah, Jim's asking for Annie to...
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call Annie in. Let me give her a warning.
Well, while you're calling, Jim, did you ever see I don't know if it was ever submitted officially, but the John Janik's Department of Finance, November 2017, about his reorganization ideas for the city to break out into different accounts?
No, I have not seen that.
I don't know that he ever submitted it, but I might, for all I know, I have the only copy, I don't know. But just for informational purposes, I had a conversation with John Janik, and one of his concerns was that Cassell was a supersized system for a small city, and that his biggest concern was that we were paying $55,000 a year for their services without what we're looking at doing now, and that we could find a system that worked just as well for a smaller city for like 25% of that. But anyway, I will give this to you, as I don't think he gave it to me. I don't think he ever submitted it.
Yeah, I have experience with Cassell, also working with my former employer, and for various reasons regarding payroll, we had the electric utility, we went to AccuFund. But, you know, as far as this case is, this is very unusual in that we have to go back and reconcile more than a year in addition to the credit cards, because proper government accounting principles and practices were not followed. And I can safely say I believe it will be extremely expensive for us, you know, to make a different move right now, because it's a fairly minimal investment, but we can take a look at it once we know where we are. I'm more than willing to do that.
Exactly. That's what I would suggest. I'll drop this up to you sometime, but I agree we need to straighten out first, but I don't know what we're looking at for a contract with them, so I would be cautious of a lengthy contract until we.
Okay. Yeah, we're looking at basically short time, very short period to do a specific job.
Yeah, have we got any on? Just so the council knows, we pay like $3,700 a month just to have our finances in the cloud with Cassell. That seems like a lot to me.
That seems exorbitant.
Yeah.
Annie?
Since we're all screwed up already.
Okay. Hey, Jim, are you still there?
Yes.
Payroll seems
So
right.
they're both on.
QuickBooks.
That's in his suggestion.
So I stopped watching after I was told I was on vacation, and I'm not sure what's going on.
But we're discussing the short-term Cassell contract extension, and that's where we are right now, and the purpose and the term and the cost.
Okay. How can I help?
So by answering that question, was it additional months?
Okay.
Detail that was in the price for that month.
Sorry, we originally entered a contract with Cassell so they could reconcile our bank statements and our credit card statements for January through August now of 2018. However, John Janik, before his departure, had mentioned that he was not comfortable with the reconciliations he had done with the second half of 2017. So in communicating with Kim, who's our lead CPA with Cassell, she quickly took a look at 2017, the second half, and realized that there are many errors and things that are not adding up. And as such, in order to be able to move forward with our 2018 financial cleanup, we now need to clean up the second half of 2017. So, because the foundation needs to be laid. So we have now entered into another contract with Cassell. It's short term. It'll take a month for them to clean up the second half. So 6 months worth of work will be done in 1 month. And then another additional 7 months of work for 2018 will be done in another month. Is that the information you guys needed?
Yeah, basically. What do we need to do that? Would be the next question, I guess.
I couldn't quite hear.
What do we need to do to make that happen?
It's already happening. The work's already begun. It needs to happen.
Okay.
So the city, we have been giving Cassell all the statements that they need begin the work. But the work is already begun. It needs to happen. It's already started.
So this is just informational, basically.
I'm having a hard time hearing.
This is just for our information. It's under new business, so it's basically just information to the council. Is there any action needed by council?
No, I don't. That I know of, there's no action. So I'm not sure if Jim had a different purpose. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm going to see my leader because I'm not quite sure. I just have information to share, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Annie.
Oh, no worries. Should I go ahead and hang up?
I'll hang up for you. Bye. Okay, it's just Jim now.
So to just say to the council, yes, this was an informational item, just to make sure that everybody understands where we are and what we're looking at. And I think, it's pretty clear to everybody right now, and we should have our answers back fairly quickly, which is good. And then proceed from there.
Jim, were you able to make contact with the gentleman that you were going to have step in for the finance reconciliation?
There are three options. I have yet to hear back from him yet, but our first step is obviously, to get our reconciliation, and then we'll speak to the other two parties, because it's going to be a commitment.
Okay. All right, so moving on to council discussion.
I was just wondering, where are we in our city manager hiring process right now?
That's what I wanted to discuss also, was just the status right now. We had narrowed down the candidates down to two candidates before we hired Jim Hunt as the interim city manager, and that bought us a little bit of time. And in the meanwhile, Abul has taken a job in Hawaii, and it kind of appeared that the council's opinion, maybe it had softened a little bit on Tom from Nome. So at this point, everything's at a standstill right now. I'd like to get suggestions from the council on how to proceed. I've written, let me read a set of procedures right now. This is just very preliminary, but this is kind of what I've gleaned from this process. We didn't have anything written down before, so I've had to learn it on the job here. But let me just start from the beginning here. What I'd like to be able to do is to make sure that the council agrees on our advertisement that we want to send out to the public to request for resumes and applications, so that we'd have a process where we would just come up with our advertisement and agree upon that, and then send it out. We put it out on our city website. We put it out on AML. We'd advertise on Monster.com. That's pretty much what we did this last time, was just AML and Monster.com. But in addition to that, we could send it out to LinkedIn. There's a website, Workplace Alaska. There's a government jobs website as well. And if we wanted to, we could take it even further and send it out to the Association of Washington Cities, which is basically their AML, but for the state of Washington. We would decide upon a set time limit, how long these advertisements would be out. The city clerk would collect all the resumes, and the city clerk would then send the resumes out to the council, and then it would be the council that would decide on maybe up to 4 candidates that we want to invite. I'm just throwing that number out, but we'd want to maybe start with a telephonic interview. We don't want to make it too complicated, so maybe we want to pare it down to 2 or 3. The city clerk would arrange for maybe a special 2-hour special meeting with consecutive, 30 to 45-minute phone calls. We'd have a preliminary set of questions for the telephonic interview. The council would then narrow down the candidates to a predetermined number that we would want to invite for a panel type interview. And then the city clerk would set up a meeting, a special meeting for a panel type interview that could, like we talked about before, possibly start at 5 o'clock, have it be open to the public. The council would then ask a second set of questions that was predetermined, and they would take turns asking the questions, alternating, each candidate getting a chance to answer a question first, and second and third. And then follow that up with, maybe a meet and greet, something, that they could talk to the public as well. Does that sound right, or do you want to make some changes to that?
It sounds good. Is there not a city managers association, as was mentioned by our previous guy, that may be a place to advertise to? Period.
I believe they're okay.
From where we've gone so far, there's one thing that I would tighten up on that if it was me, is the questions should not be random questions from every council member. If we want different questions, but we should get a consensus for the questions and stick to the same questions. And within that, there should be a list of things that you don't ask, which happened last time. So there's certain questions you're not allowed to ask. You can ask them, you just have to state them correctly. So I would prefer a more structured, not at the meet and greet, but in the interview process of sticking with a like the thing Shawnee gave me, but just create it. So that'd be one thing.
Yeah, I agree. That we would have, we would all decide on a set of questions, and that would be, a set of 15 questions or whatever we think is relevant, and that we would, possibly say that the first telephonic questions might be geared more towards experience, and then the second set of questions, during the meet and greet or during the panel interview might be more towards philosophy or something along those lines, whatever we decided. But it would be a definite set of questions. They would be attached to our procedures here that we've got, and we would have a package that the city clerk could keep, so that whenever this came up in the future, we would have a written set of procedures going forward forward. Of course, it could be modified depending on the circumstances, but the next group of people wouldn't have to start from scratch. They would have something to start with.
I agree totally. One of the ways, when you said 15 questions, one of the ways to shorten the interview process also is to submit a list of questions. So basically an application, but it's questions, and let them fill it out, and then we could have that and review that before. So and then we could meet a little bit beforehand, whatever, and review. If we reviewed it, it might create more questions for us to ask. So questions from his answers, and if you're done with that, I have a suggestion for the here and now, because we have had difficulty doing this process, because we are in the middle of the financial stuff. Jim, I haven't had a chance to ask this to you, but my feeling is at this point we should suspend the pursuit of a city manager and at least keep you as interim through cleaning up the financial process and the budget, if you're willing to do so. And then my next statement would be that, you know, my basketball coach in high school, we were talking about premarital sex. He says, you know, you try on a pair of shoes before you buy them, don't you? I think this would give us a huge opportunity to see if Jim is the one we want, and we can just roll him in without having to go back through the interview process. That's my feeling.
That just eliminated my uncomfortable position. Thank you.
Yeah. In the whole process of talking about this?
Yeah, because I had submitted my application, although late, but the ad was still up and said until the position was filled. Oh, okay. So I was getting a little queasy.
That was just my feeling, but to me, now is not the time. September and October is not the time to get a new city manager. I just don't see that. I just don't see it.
Oh, no, wait. I'd like to get this straightened out and work with you and get this straightened out. There's a lot of projects going on right now, and I've submitted, I'll resubmit and compete gladly. Like I said, I've already, no matter what, I'm already riding for the brand, and my wife and I are now vested in the community, so I look forward to that.
Okay, so then if I want to hear from other council members, but if a question to you, which I was going to ask you, is are you comfortable with a month to month on that, or would you like to see a revised contract with a specific date? That's for your benefit, not for mine.
I'll just be honest, my concern is at the end of this month and going forward, I have no health insurance for my family, which is what I have to deal with. And I'm not pushing the council, but, you know, it's just a matter of life, act of life. But, you know, if we want to look at, 3-4 months, 3-4 month contract, we can go from there. In the meantime, I'm going to do some demoing and renoing and moving in during the week.
I agree with Mr. Pinkush. We're required by law to produce a 2019 budget for the end of the year, which is rapidly approaching.
Yes, I agree. And we've got a lot of work to do.
So then let's have the city clerk withdraw the advertisement for now.
So does that require a motion, a resolution, a straw poll?
A straw poll. It wasn't done by motion, was it?
If we're not going to hire someone now, when would we start the process again?
That would be why I would rather than going a month to month, is another reason to do it would be to give us a window to that. We could go to December 31st, whatever people want to do. But I think I think it's healthy for Jim to know that we're not going to get rid of him next month.
The position isn't interim,
and I don't know the answer to that is. I mean, we may not. I mean, isn't there a limit, Jim, on how? Is that not true for city managers, interim? No, it's for other positions. I don't think interims have a time if you hire somebody into some positions in the city, if you make them temporary, then after 6 months, they have to take a month off or something. I don't think it applies to city manager, does it? Okay. I'm getting the bobbleheads in the back saying, no, it doesn't. That you're separate, so.
Why would we stop advertising? If we're not hiring anybody, where are we going to stop?
Because then what we'll do is we'll start the process over. We may modify our advertisement, and then we'll start the process over again and cast a wider net. But right now, I think we've received one resume in the last month. It basically has petered out, and so when we do it again, we'll just cast a wider net, start from scratch. If we do that, if that's what we decide to do.
Can the mayor speak to Jim about a short contract and bring it to the next council meeting?
So we're still in council discussion, and what I'd like to recommend to council is that that I bring a 4-month contract, basically to take us through 2018, and you guys read the contract, and if you like it, approve it. Does that sound like a reasonable suggestion, Peter?
Fine. Yeah, this is a little bit of a paradigm shift here, but if greater minds than mine want to go that way, I don't know why. Yeah, stopping advertising at this point, I don't know. I know we need to dial in our system a little bit better. We do have issues in front of us. A short-term contract for Mr. Hunt makes sense going into budget season, among other things. I'm not all that involved in the hiring process. I've only was at one meet and greet to meet that one guy. I don't know. If we are in a position to forward our immediate needs and want to forestall this until after the budget, I do not have a problem with it.
So the actual action that I'm proposing we would take in September. So maybe by then it's only a 3-month.
Okay. Two reasons I would submit that is good. Number one is if Jim ends up being the person we hire, we saved ourselves a lot of work. And secondly, when you start a hiring process and it's not working real well, it's always cleaner. It's easier to start and get it cleaned up and just do it right. So I think we'd have a much better process. And that's the other thing you run into is you throw out an advertisement and I've seen that one and it gets old, and you have to change the wording and get it. It's like Craigslist. You got to redo it every 3 days to bring it back up to the top again.
Well, then would it make sense, just as a matter of politeness, if nothing else, for all those who have applied, is to give them a specific response that we have decided to work with our existing interim and will be reposting the job sometime in 2019 and hope you may choose to reapply again at that time, rather than just letting it die and leaving people hanging.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. Can you do that? Can you make sure that you respond? You've got copies of all of the resumes. You could respond to each one of them and let them know what the situation is.
I would probably say use the word we may resubmit, we may re-advertise rather than we are.
Well, I think we have to re-advertise, do we not?
You don't want my answer.
Aileen, if you want some help, just shoot me an email.
Yes.
Be happy to. So, go ahead, Peter.
Oh, no, go ahead and finish off.
I was just going to I will be talking to Jim and trying to hammer out what appears to be a 3-month contract by the time next regular agenda happens in September. Are there any items left on council discussion? Peter.
I started the meeting by voting against approving the agenda, and there is a reason for that. We have discussed in this council chamber for over a year. 2 or 3 months ago, there was, to my ear, general council approval and administrative approval as well for the development of administrative and operating policies, which, Mr. Hunt, do not exist in the city of Whittier at this time, and a research into revamping and modernizing our code. Many of these issues that we are being compelled to address over and over and over again is simply we're attacking symptoms and we're not attacking the disease here. I don't understand how an organization can operate without administrative policies, and I will not vote to support any agenda or any subsequent resultant action from not having those policies until we get there. I see this as the one critical move here. We wouldn't be having this money problem right now if we had those policies, and even the policies that are insinuated in our code have not been followed. So, Mr. Hunt, if you're going to be with us here for a few months, I am going to keep pushing very hard for the development of policy for our organization here. And I think that one of the indicators of this is if you look at our legal expense, we're going to be pushing $1 million this year on lawyers. And if we had a working policy...
I think you're going to be very pleased with what I have planned.
Well, I'll look forward to meeting you in person and hearing all about it.
Yeah, we're looking at a PO system, no more paying bills over the telephone, updating policies, just standard operating policies, general, practices, principles, and then we can address the code. It's an art form. I've got a fire hose in my house, in my mouth right now, but I've got the resources, to help correct and redirect and get us on the right track.
Thank you. This has been a priority of mine for a long time. We have taken no action, and I am singularly focused on this issue.
Excellent. We're all on the same path. We know where we need to go. And I've got some tools and resources to help us get there much faster than normal.
Thank you.
I have one more comment, and this is for, I don't know if Annie's still listening, but Annie and Jim, and I'm not saying it should be. I'm simply going to give you a little history and years ago, years and years ago, we used to contract out our finance department, and the consensus of the council was that it would be better to employ that person in Whittier to create another job than it would be to have it contracted out, and everybody supported that. But year after year after year, we have not been able to keep a finance director. So, in my opinion, is because of that difficulty, similar to the police department, that I would definitely not be adamant that I wanted a finance director person if we could contract out, go back to contracting, it may be a better option for the city. Just my opinion, but we've tried and tried and tried, and it seems like they're the first ones to go. So.
Can I just add a comment there? I appreciate your opinion, especially, with the trauma that occurs from, I'm not going to, judge anybody but those who may have been qualified or not better qualified. Having worked with one of the most brilliant finance directors, on the West Coast, let alone Alaska, the right person makes all the difference. But then again, it's hard to find great people right now, and contracting, not just long-term or short-term might be the answer. Because the qualified people come at a premium. And so we're going to have to, pull our boots up and tighten our belts and take a look, what's the best avenue and what's the best way to go. I agree.
Looks like council's discussed. Moving on to citizens discussion. Lindsay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make mine short and sweet. I just have a couple of school comments to throw in there. I didn't have a written report prepared for you as I was only back to work yesterday and it wasn't a high priority, sorry. School does start tomorrow, so as you're pulling out of BTI or at breakfast time or during lunch, just know that there's going to be a lot more little kids running across the street there, so slow down, please. We have our back to school night September 6th. That will be a potluck, so throw that on your calendars. Come eat some food. It always is good. We have a school board meeting. Our school board typically meets, I would say, about 9 times a year. They are going to meet in Whittier for their September meeting this year. That's September 5th. It's a Wednesday. I'm not sure if it's going to conflict with planning and zoning. I'm not sure if that meeting will be held that night or not, but if it conflicts, the school board will look at changing that meeting date, but I'll keep you informed on that. I think with the conversations about the borough and other things going on, it would be great to have somebody from the council there to ask the school district's input. I don't know what that is. I haven't been involved in any of these conversations. I actually didn't know anything about it till last week, but I think getting some input on our administrative level would be beneficial. We have an EAC meeting. That's our Educational Advisory Committee. So basically a PTA meeting September 10th that we will be looking for members and a president for that committee. So if anybody else wants to commit some more time each month, we're looking for that. I also want to remind everybody that we serve breakfast at 8:45 to 9 o'clock. It is open free to the community. I've reached out to different departments in the city to try to get staff up there. It has worked on and off throughout the years. I think it's really beneficial to see city community members at breakfast with the kids to see everybody in a different light. So I just wanted to remind everybody, but that is a free breakfast every day that you're welcome to come in and have with the kids. Our enrollment this year, I just have some preliminary numbers, and we're actually up this year. Our K-12 enrollment, we just added 6 new kids today. So we're going to run about 43 kids and then add another 6 to 8 in our preschool. So from going from our enrollment last October to 28 up to 43, throw your preschool in, let's call it 50, that's a huge increase. So whatever the city is doing, whatever the community is doing to keep people here, at least is working at a school, from a school perspective right now. So thank you guys for doing what you do on the council to make sure that I have a job here. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Mr. Goldstein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. To Mr. Hunt, this is the first time that I've ever heard of a prospective or interim city manager actually buying a residence in Whittier. As a matter of fact, I don't think I can remember a city manager ever buying a residence in Whittier. So regardless of whether you stay as the interim city manager, become the city manager, or you just become an involved citizen, welcome to Whittier. And I would echo Councilor Denmark's congratulations or condolences. Just as a side note, in your discussion about the Cassell program and bookkeeping and finance, I happened to talk to an old friend who happens to be a bookkeeper and accountant, and earlier today, and we were talking about software that communities use. And you might be interested, I think Councilor Denmark again mentioned QuickBooks. There are communities in Alaska that use QuickBooks. The harbor uses QuickBooks. It interfaces with Cassell. Cassell is a very expensive program. QuickBooks has a lot of options. A finance person or a bookkeeper should be able to do the job regardless of the software. The software just makes it easy to present it and presents all of the data in a form that you can use. So it doesn't matter whether you use QuickBooks, Cassell, Whodunit, or whatever. The other comment that I wanted to make here concerns the DeLong dock. We had a vessel, some of you remember the tradition, years ago that was tied to the fixed dock, and the tide went out. The boat basically listed, the tide came back in, the boat sank, and it was a headache for years. I think many of you who were here remember that. At any rate, now we've had the problem again with damage to the dock, apparently because it's a fixed dock, because of the weather, the vessel's banging into it. And as far as insurance funds, I know with the state, and I think the insurance is with the state, there usually are some mitigation avenues that communities can approach to address some of these recurring problems. We've had this basically occur twice with two specific incidents, at least in my recollection, and it might be prudent to investigate some mitigation funds to deal with this fixed dock and the tides that go up and down, and of course the weather that impacts that. This is in a fairly exposed area, and I'm sure someone can come up with a solution that again lowers all of these problems or lowers the possibility of these problems. Finally, the borough issue. I happen to be on the council with Councilor Denmark, the Vice Mayor, Jerry Vandegrift, and several other people when Whittier basically spearheaded the drive to involve a borough, Prince William Sound borough. And I can't even begin to tell you the exhaustive work that everybody did, the meetings that we had, going over the ramifications of that. There's a lot of history, and I would encourage each and every one of you to go back over that history, read it, understand it. If you have questions, go to Peter Denmark or go to some of the people who were around at the time. You'll learn a lot. That was Whittier driven. This one is Girdwood driven. The big problem I think I had tonight is that we had basically a presentation and discussion on the borough issue, and it wasn't on the agenda. I think Councilor Shen brought that up. Thank you. I concur 100%. The two problems that we had in the past basically were related to the council moving in one direction, rumors and data, misinformation or information going to the community in other avenues, and the two split apart. And finally, when the decision to move forward with the borough came before the community, there was a resounding no. So the message here is do your homework, go over the history, and involve the community from the get-go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Okay, see no more council discussion or citizens discussion. All in favor of adjournment? Aye. Aye.
You can stay.
your phone or on a handset.